I'm glad you could do this for us.
We'll see.
Green shirt.
I'm doing.
Time to gear up.
All right, come on, everybody, and get settled. I'll get my speakers up here to the front. Okay. Well, we need to go ahead and get started because, as we say, the clock is running.
Right there.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and let them do this, and I'm going to go ahead and start talking. I do want to welcome everybody here tonight to learn more about the Flagler County Wetlands Restoration Project. I assume everybody in this room knows a whole lot more about this project than I do. My job is to be a neutral facilitator to help get your questions answered. My name is Clay Henderson. I'm with Stetson University and the director of the Institute for Water and Environmental Resilience. Some of you may or may not know Stetson just down the road. We're the oldest university in Florida, and I'm happy to say we have professors that work on wetlands issues all around the world. It's something that is very important to us. We protect our role as honest brokers and conveners to bring together various stakeholders to learn more from each other about environmental issues and tried to develop innovative policies and options to improve our natural resources. Our role is neutral, and our job is to improve communication between stakeholders, and that's why we appreciate you being here tonight. The meeting tonight was at the request of many of you to allow your questions to be answered in a public forum so that everyone in attendance could have access to the same information. My goal tonight is for everyone to have the opportunity to have their questions be answered in an open and transparent setting. I also have the job of trying to manage the time to maximize your ability to answer these questions, but also give you the opportunity to speak so that we can hear directly from you. And we're going to need everybody's cooperation to make that work. We also need to acknowledge our appreciation to the Santa Maria del Mar Catholic Church where we are tonight. They are our host. We appreciate this beautiful space. I know it's all of us, we will all honor this space by being respectful and civil tonight. This is the kind of space that deserves it. Personally, I'm grateful that the roof hasn't fallen in because I'm standing up here. This is a new experience for me, but very honored to be here. So with that, we have some ground rules. I just want to talk to you about that from the beginning. We're going to have a brief presentation as an update on this project, things that have happened since the last meeting, and that may save us some time tonight. I have in my hands questions that would take us well past midnight to get through. So I'm going to do my best to try to group some questions together, try to get them in some order as we go through here, and try to get them through as best that we can. Also hope not to spill them all over. I'm going to do my best to get as many of them questions as we can. And after we go through this exercise, we're going to try to reserve some time for people to express their views. I want to try to get a show of hands of folks that really want to be heard tonight, when we get down to this, so because to help balance this. So I'm looking at about 15 folks, so we've reserved about 30 minutes. That's about 2 minutes apiece. There'll be a timer. That's good. I was worried that there might be 50 hands that went up, so we will be able to get through that. We're trying to be respectful of everyone's time, and I know that a lot of us have come, an hour to get here, and it'll be an hour to go home, and so we will get you out of here, or I will gavel this down at 7:30. I do want to stress this. While our questions and comments we do have the opportunity to improve this project, this is not where decisions are going to be made. The final decision will be made by the governing board, tentatively set for Palatka on December 11th. There will be an opportunity for public comment during the governing board meeting, and there is ample time to provide written comments if you do not wish to attend the meeting. If you do intend to go or do not intend, you can look at the agenda and the backup materials online, and you'll also be able to see it streamed by video on the internet if that's what you like. I will tell you that we're honored tonight to have 3 members of the governing board with us here tonight. They are the decision makers, and so I'll ask them to stand and be recognized. The chairman is John Michaelis, secretary Chuck Drake, and board member Alan Roberts. Stan, we appreciate you being here. What I'd like to do now is to, one more thing before we get to Eric. This is a new one for me, the frog people, actually the froggers, the Friends of Gamble Rogers State Park. Raise your hands in the back. These are good. We got some folks in the back, though, is who I need to recognize. The folks who will pick up your questions. If there's a burning question that comes through during this that you want to have asked, they've got the cards. Raise your hand. They'll come get it from you, and they'll bring it up to here. We appreciate their help. So next, we're going to hear briefly from Dr. Eric Marzoff, the Director of the Division of Land and Water Resources at the Water Management District, who is responsible for directing the district's aquatic sciences, land and water resource management activities, land acquisition, hydraulic, and water quality data collection efforts. He was going to make a brief update on the project and the changes that have been made since the last meeting. Dr. Marzoff.
Thank you all. First, thank you once again for coming out this evening. We've made a number of changes. We've been reflecting on the input we got in our last workshop. Thanks also to the church for welcoming us into this wonderful facility. That was one of the comments we got at the last workshop, is change the venue, and we've got a much bigger space. We've also, as you noted, changed how the meeting will be run. So we have Mr. Clay Henderson here to facilitate our discussion this evening. So first, into the question that was raised relative to revegetation after the spoil is moved off the piles into the ditch. We have worked out an agreement where there will be opportunities for some limited revegetation. We're working on the details, but the plants will come from the park, and we'll be looking for volunteers to help guide that process, both in terms of what are the areas specifically that we want to see planted, and also getting out and getting dirty and putting the plants in. So that's a to be determined with your input as well. Next up is, there's been concern expressed about the potential for pesticides, namely DDT, on the site. To the best of our ability, we can't find any record that DDT was ever applied in the area, going back to the agency that was in charge, who came into being in 1952. In spite of that, we've had a contractor that got out this afternoon, and collected samples throughout the project area, and they were shipped off to the lab, and we hope to have those results back in the next couple weeks. Really don't know exactly when, but those will be shared on our webpage, and we'll send out an email blast as soon as those results are available. Turbidity barriers. A lot of questions and concerns about how we manage the turbidity. The district has purchased a portable turbidity monitor, and we'll be monitoring throughout the project within the phases that are currently under restoration, as well as throughout the area. The goal is to partly understand the variation through the whole area in turbidity, but also understand what's happening adjacent to where the work is occurring. The turbidity, as was discussed at the last meeting, is really the key parameter in the permits for doing the work in terms of water quality. So we're going to be closely watching that, and we'll be using the data that we collect to help guide when it's ready to move the turbidity barriers and allow the space to be opened back up again. Oyster reef protection. A lot of interest expressed in how do we protect oyster reefs. Our original mapping we know is based on imagery, and we know we can miss some of the smaller reefs because they just don't show up well. So another opportunity for folks to provide input on reefs that they know about, let us know. We also have people that will be out in the field. Chris will be out while the work is going on, looking and marking the reefs when we move into a new phase. So a lot of guidance and protection will go into locating the reefs, and then as the equipment moves, doing everything possible to prevent damage to those reefs. Monitoring. There's kind of two sets of monitoring that's involved in this. One is the short term, what happens during the project. So that's kind of the turbidity monitoring is part of that. On the longer term, we know we've talked about at the last meeting, the water quality monitoring and the DEP's impairment determination. Those monitoring sites will continue. They'll probably be continuing for many years because they've just entered the first phase in the project of addressing water quality, and that's determining the impairment. That starts off the total maximum daily load process, which identifies the pollutants of particular concern, how much are coming in, how much is in excess, what are the sources. That then starts the Basin Management Action Plan, which involves the community, everyone in the watershed, who's got to identify projects to reduce the nutrients or other pollutants coming in to the amount that's determined to be acceptable to get the water body back to health. That's a long process. So the monitoring that's an example of long-term monitoring that will continue for years, if not many decades. In terms of other things, vegetation, fish, other animals, birds, we're still working on how to best monitor that, monitor that. We have good baseline information from years ago on fish that were collected in this area compared to species collected using the same methods in the Mosquito Lagoon. So we think we have a good baseline for what's in this area, and those will be good reference for collections made post-project. But I think it's important for everyone to understand that's fisheries response is going to be a long-term response because it's going to take a while for the vegetation to recover. Once the vegetation recovers, it'll take time for the fish to get used to that area again. Plus, with the just natural variability in fish sampling, that knowing that the fishery has improved, however it responds, is going to be a long-term endeavor. So there won't be a snap, easy answer to that like there would be for, say, the turbidity monitoring. So the next slide I want to show you, 2 slides tonight, real simple, are the map updates. The map on the left was the original map you saw at the October meeting. There were 2 sets of comments we heard in that meeting. One was people coming up and drawing on the maps themselves, specific places that were important to them. There were another set of more general comments about the project itself, and we've implemented some changes to try and address those. So let's talk about the site-specific changes first. So if you look on your handouts or up at the screen, and I don't know, you're about evenly split, maybe a little more over here. So The green lines through here, and at this, well, you can see my hand wobble. The green lines through there are places where people told us it's important for us to be able to navigate our boats through those areas. So those are areas that we will keep open, and we won't be putting spoil in those paths. So those green areas are going to be kept open. The other change is, I can't even see it on this, on the far west side there are some white lines here, and that's where essentially we've set the restoration back a little bit to the east by a row or two of spoil piles. So essentially the buffer between the homeowners of private lands on the west side of the project area, that's gotten larger by the width of a row or two depending on just the local topography. So those are the two big changes we've made to the maps. One, specific places people drew on the maps that they wanted to ensure they were able to navigate, and the other was realigning the western boundary a bit, pushing it a bit back to the east to give a larger buffer to the project area and the homeowners on the west. And with that, that's my update.
How's that? There we go. Everything's working now. We have a panel tonight. You just met Dr. Marzoff. He's going to be joined by two folks who you may know have been part of this project. Jeff Beal is a biological scientist for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, their marine estuarine subsection, and is responsible scientist for much of the commission's marine habitat work. And Chris Flagler is the project contractor ecologist for this project from the Florida Resource Conservation Development Council, and they're here to answer the questions tonight. I think what I'm going to do, since I'm not tethered to anything, is step right out here so I can see these folks. And I've got we're going to run through this. We're going to do as best we can. And if I think we're getting redundant, I'll say, okay, we'll move on. But we've got a lot of questions here. We want to get as many as we can. And, I'll start with a couple of just sort of basic general ones. This is from John Razzo, who asked, why is this restoration being done? What justification is there for this project? Maybe you can answer. Who wants to take that one? Jeff?
Sure, be glad to. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. The reality is we're losing wetlands around the world. It's not just a problem on the east coast of Florida. It's not just a problem in this nation. It's a problem around the world. And the remedy for that is often to restore wetlands as best we can. There's a large body of literature that tells us that coastal wetlands are more important than open water for lots of the things we care about. Things like fishes, especially commercially and recreationally important ones, blue crabs, edible shrimps, etc. And so we see this happening worldwide, this move to restore those areas. Of course, we've lost a lot of those areas for various reasons. A good example in my mind that really hits close to home is that of the Mississippi River. Because they've diverted the Mississippi, it no longer provides that sediment that's important for marshes to continue to sustain themselves in the Louisiana area. So ever since Hurricane Katrina, that state in particular has been working on restoring wetlands. And in fact, that's where that technology was developed for the Marsh Master machines that we use for our work. So they are going about converting open water back into wetland. Building hundreds and hundreds of acres of marshes because we know that they're important. And so in this case in Florida, on the East Coast, we've impacted our wetlands in lots of different ways. Further south, we've impounded them. In this region and to the north, we've dragline ditched them. And so our goal is to maximize that wetland footprint as much as possible because we know how important wetlands are. And there's basically 5 key functions that we can glean from the literature that's important about coastal wetlands. They export detritus, that is, they make plant material that turns into food. They're part of the nutrient cycling process. in estuaries. They trap sediments. They remove or trap pollutants, and they're a habitat for juvenile fish and invertebrates. So that's why coastal wetlands are important and why we restore them.
As a follow-up question, Jody Vangall asked, what scientific or impact studies were made on this project to show that the benefits outweigh the damage during the construction period? Who wants to take that? Is that a Eric question?
Sure. The impacts to coastal wetlands in this area were first identified in a survey that went back to about 2007 up and down the East Coast. A lot of wetlands that had been identified, as Jeff said, as either dragline ditched or impounded. That information has been built into a whole variety of recovery plans for the area. There's surface water improvement and management plans. There are, I'm blanking out on a couple others, but those plans have been in place for Mosquito Lagoon, Indian River Lagoon, northern coastal basins, and have all identified the loss of these wetlands as an important feature that needs to be addressed in the improvement and management of these areas. What we see, sadly, in the aerial imagery of these areas over time is that the width of the ditches is broadening. So the areas that we currently see are not the areas we saw a decade ago. Sea level rise has continued to make the area of wetlands shrink, even though the ditching, the primary cause, occurred many decades before that. So the fact that the current situation isn't sustainable, and we can see that in aerial imagery over time, is one of the big indicators that we need to do something here to enhance and get these wetlands back to where they're sustainable.
This is a specific question as to the project for Matt Hathaway. Will mature palms, oaks, cedars, and mangroves be buried in the waterway? I mean, what vegetation is going to be cleared and where will it go? And what kind of aquatic life would be killed during the course of this project? Chris, I'll push that one to you.
So
I can hear you. I'm right next to you.
See, we're learning how to be rock stars.
Could you
Okay,
guys
this
hear
is
him?
not new to us.
Could you
It's not
guys hear
easy.
him in the back? Can you hear
Can
him?
y'all hear me? So the process will include clearing vegetation from the spoil piles, cabbage palms and cedars and Brazilian peppers with an excavator, an amphibious excavator, and that vegetation will be pushed over first into the adjoining ditch or the adjoining fingers on either side of the ditches, and it'll be pushed down, and then the spoil that is to be regraded will be pushed over, across, and on top of that cleared vegetation. And so that's basically the process. Was there another part to that question?
What vegetation that's going to be killed or wildlife?
Yeah. So the vegetation that's going to be cleared is vegetation that's, in some cases, is exotic vegetation, which is Brazilian peppers. It's also vegetation that isn't a functional part of the marsh system. Cedars and upland species, cabbage palms and prickly pear cactus, and things that aren't a productive part of the marsh system. So that's the vegetation ultimately that's going to be pushed over. In some cases, there will be minimal, or we'll make efforts to minimize impacts to mangroves, but there will be some adjacent mangroves that will also be pushed over and into the adjacent ditch. And then as far as impact to species, there are, you might have fiddler crabs that are at the edge of the footprint of the spoil pile. But if you look at the overall increase in footprint of fiddler crab habitat, you'll see that for that one particular species in particular, we'll actually have a net gain for conditions that are conducive for fiddler crabs. So.
This is a multi-part question from Colleen Fisher in terms of the time frame and the project. When are you going to get started? How long is it going to go? Are there funds in place to complete it? And I think you've sort of answered this, but weighing the benefits from ecological benefits versus the damage during the time of construction. That looks like a Eric question.
Okay. We don't know exactly when it will go to our governing board for consideration again. We will have at least an update at the December meeting. We'll be listening to your input this evening to think about when that might occur. We think the restoration process itself will take about a year to complete. Over that year, it will be done within phases with some certain areas sectioned off by turbidity barrier, work done there. So the recolonization will start almost immediately, and depending on the season, you'll see vegetation out there within weeks and months. It's certainly not going to return to maturity within the year in which the work is being done. But again, we take a long-term view in doing restoration work. The whole goal of the project is to increase the area that's at that elevation where the tidal inundation comes and goes, increase that wetland area at the expense of what's either a spoil pile or the ditch, because it's that wetland area that's so key. Did I miss a part? Oh, and yes, all the funds are in place.
All in place. And permits, are all the permits in place?
All the permits are in place.
I'm going to paraphrase a question here from Debbie Carroll, and I think these ditches were put in as part of mosquito control, and so we've had a lot of rain this year. Do we expect to have more mosquitoes as a result of this, or as a result of this project? How does this affect the population of mosquitoes?
There should be we see no reason to expect an increase. There's no evidence that there's ever an increase in mosquito populations as a result of this type of restoration. One of my jobs will be to oversee the equipment operators to make sure that these sites are graded properly and that the flow remains intact, and so that we don't have instances of pooling or ponding to create additional mosquito breeding sites.
Just one additional comment, that the work that we have done in the past has always been in coordination and cooperation with the local mosquito control folks. So they're well aware of what they do, what we're planning to do. They're very supportive of the past work because they recognize this doesn't affect their ability to maintain mosquito control.
Yep. Can I just add to that? From the fish perspective, one of the project goals is that we'll be creating those marsh residents. So those fishes that spend their entire life history within the marsh. And the vast majority of those are mosquito eaters. And they eat them at the larval stage. So mosquitoes go through several different larval stages before they form wings and fly. And the fishes do a tremendous job of eating those. And so one of the benefits of the project is that we're maximizing production of those fishes, and by not completely closing off these ditches, we're giving them access to the mosquito brood. So mosquitoes are part of the marsh system. We would never get rid of them, neither would we want to. But what we want is for that production to be eaten within the marsh and to work its way up to the food chain to the species that we care about. And so this type of restoration is a perfect balance of that. We still get mosquito control with maximizing fish production.
A question from Kathleen Sochar. Why are you attempting to perform restoration work in an area that is healthy and thriving with aquatic bird and plant life when there are many areas in the district's jurisdiction whose aquatic environments are severely struggling and could desperately use this funding? I think that's a district question.
Sure. The key funding partner for this work is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That funding source is earmarked. It's got strings for wetland restoration work. Those dollars, this project was in competition nationwide for funding. So it beat out projects from all around the country in terms of its ability to return benefits based on the investment of those dollars. The Game Commission, state parks, DEP, we're all contributing because we all recognize that this project is important to this area for a whole suite of reasons. In terms of alternative restoration areas, there are a lot of places that, yes, do need work, but the funds that are earmarked for this kind of work just aren't eligible for doing those sorts of activities in other places. So,
Here's a question from Cass Ledyard. There are several that are like this, and I'll sort of paraphrase this into one question. In terms of the action that, or the research that went into the permits, was there environmental impact statement? Was there environmental assessment? Were those required?
no. I mean, we've gone through the permitting process for this sort of work on several occasions. We've done this sort of work on the 600-ish acres throughout our district. We haven't had to go through that process, but there's not to say the permitting process isn't very thorough, and we have to go through that with both the Department of Environmental Protection and also with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Another question similar to several. Has there been an attempt to work with the homeowners to try to shrink the size of the project, to have fewer trees or oyster bars or other areas, the impacts lessened and or removed further from residential areas?
Yes.
And that's what you mentioned, or you moved this, we moved this back how far for the residential areas?
It depends specifically where you are. So it varies depending on where you are, north, south, along the western boundary.
Okay.
And I think it's important to point out too that this site is somewhat unique compared to other areas we've worked in this past to the south, where you might have seen pictures of very much large scale because you had massive spoil areas and very little wetland vegetation left. This area is not like that. For that reason, the district has produced a map that maybe we can show tonight that gives an estimate of the spread of each spoil pile. So it's a matter of taking these piles and spreading them out as much as the material will allow. So it's not large-scale changes as we've seen in other areas where we had much larger spoil piles. So I think it's worth pointing that out.
Here's a big picture question from David Still. Are these restoration efforts being performed in an attempt to delay having to address the real issues of water quality, such as nutrient loading, waste dumping, fertilizers, and pesticides? Stakeholders, the district's role is to manage water quality, yet it seems addressing the root cause of the water quality issues, such as nutrient loading, should be a priority. Why should taxpayer money be going toward this type of restoration that has not produced evidence of improved water quality when other issues need to be addressed?
This project wasn't located based on the impairment of water quality. That impairment was determined this past June. The site was identified many years before that. So no, this project is not intended to either fix the water quality problems or to distract from addressing them. Those are two independent, parallel efforts. This restoration effort of these wetlands, addressing the nutrient or water quality impairment, presumed nutrients, I'm presuming, because the impairment was based on chlorophyll, the amount of algae in the water. Those are two completely independent processes. The Department of Environmental Protection is responsible for the impairment, total maximum daily load, TMDL, and Basin Management Action Plan, BMAP. So you're going to learn some acronyms. They are responsible for that process completely independently of this restoration work.
But the reality is we need all of these things, right? Mm-hmm. You know, in order to improve our waterways, we're going to have to do things like fix our stormwater problems, fix our septic tanks, convert them to a sewer wherever we can. But we do that in concert with habitat restoration. And marshes are especially good at that. It's fairly tricky to do things like seagrass restoration if the water quality isn't good. Seagrasses are submerged plants, but like any plant, they require light. And so if the water quality is not there, it's very tough to get that sort of habitat restored. Salt marshes, on the other hand, are tremendous at taking up nutrients. In fact, we use them as treatment wetlands. I have multiple texts in my office, treatment wetlands, parts 1, 2, and 3, that talk about the fact that we can take highly nutrient water, nitrogen, phosphorus, etc., and put that through wetlands and allow them to cleanse the water. So we use this all over the world, this technology, especially true for salt marshes. In fact, there's been a lot of studies in salt marshes where we'll block off an area, put in fertilizer or manure, and watch and see what happens. And the plants are tremendous at taking up these nutrients. What generally happens is they'll grow leaves faster, and then over time they'll grow roots faster. So it's that above ground biomass that happens first. But it also changes the invertebrate community, which is what the fishes are using, of course. That's the prey items for the fish. So the point being that coastal wetlands are tremendous at taking up nutrients. So it's very important for us to restore them as part of this whole restoration process.
You want to make a additional comment? The point of the question is well taken because it is important in some of our, especially in freshwater lakes, where we are trying to reduce the nutrients going in, because what happens is more nutrients, more algae, the algae cloud the water. That cloudiness prevents light from reaching the bottom. The submersed plants die. Those submersed plants are the base for the food chain. There, people are most interested in brim and bass and those sorts of things. The district doesn't even begin to come in and try and restore those plant beds until the water quality is improved enough that we get an indication that there's light reaching the bottom. There's no point in putting plants at the bottom of a lake where the water isn't clear enough to support the vegetation. So there is a sequence that makes sense, which I think was kind of the heart of the question. It's a different situation here.
Different deal. Chris, here's a project-related question from Richard Tersey. We understand pontoon boats will be used for refueling the excavator. Is that the right name for the term, for the boat or the thing out there?
Yes.
What will the draft be on the pontoon boat? What would the extra weight of the fuel, or the EPA or OSHA guidelines for refueling it? Is there a plan in place to remediate any accidental leaks or spills?
I don't know the draft of the pontoon boat, but I do know that there is going to be a pontoon boat used for refueling. And as far as a couple of those other specific questions, I would direct those maybe to Ron.
There is a management plan for refueling, including spill management. That's all part of the documentation with the contractor for the.
Right, so that's, yeah, so yeah, I don't know if you could hear Ron, but yes, there is documentation with the actual contractor. And just to clarify, I'm the project ecologist separate from the actual contractor that will be running the excavator. So the contractor that has the excavator, that will be running the excavator, has that documentation and that plan in their contract. So.
This is from Linda Birch. Stakeholders have asked if there is or will be an economic impact study or a property value study. Stakeholders have been told no to both. Why wouldn't you perform these studies, seeing the end result of this project could have an impact to both? It seems like a district question.
We think no, we don't intend to do it. We don't think it's necessary. We recognize that there are benefits to having property adjacent to conservation areas. Since we're improving this conservation area, I would anticipate that it would support greater property values, but I don't think we need to spend the resources or time to evaluate that.
This is from Rob Rothman, and there's a lot of words here I'm going to summarize. We all know the value of wetlands, particularly mangroves, in terms of protecting us from the effects of storm surge, as we've seen in the last few years. Given the unknown lag time when the removed vegetation, including many mature mangroves, will regrow, what happens to adjacent homes if we're hit by a storm weather event after the mangroves or other protective infrastructure that are currently in place are no longer there? What can we expect, and what can we do about that?
Counting on the mangroves alone is probably not a good idea. The mangroves are here, they're extending their range north. 1989, there was a freeze and every mangrove in this area was frozen and died. So during warm periods, they come up and they're recolonizing. That's why some people have referred to them kind of as invasive, not necessarily in a bad context, but as they're reflecting the change in the warming that we're seeing in this area. So there's a trade-off between mangroves and herbaceous wetlands. In terms of storm attenuation, if there's a big storm coming through, whether this project is done or not won't matter. It just won't matter. Finally, the footprint of where we're working, replacing spoil piles which waves can bounce off of with a wetland which is much better at attenuating waves is a good protection. And remember, we're not taking out all the natural uplands. So when we're looking at where this work is to be conducted, if there's a natural upland, we're not touching it. If there's a spoil pile that's already a little bit low and colonized, we're not touching it. So we're not changing that dramatically how this area is going to respond to storms. And we've looked at that from a variety of storm models. I think the key message is if there's a big storm coming this way to this part of the coast, we all need to go. It won't matter whether this project is done or not.
This is a question from Sandra Soltis, and I'm going to paraphrase it. It's long, about monitoring. What are the monitoring plans for this? Is the 10% set aside in the budget for monitoring sufficient to do this? Will your team be doing the monitoring, or will somebody else be doing that? And if it's part of your team, is that a conflict? I'll let y'all figure that one out.
Well, again, as I said before, there's two types of monitoring. There's the short term during the project, longer term. We are still discussing how we will monitor in the longer term fish, birds, other animals in the area. The vegetation will be watching. That's still we're still working out the details of how we're going to do that.
And ultimately, the goal would be to partner with universities. We do a lot of monitoring work with our state universities, especially. University of Central Florida, for example, have done a lot of work for us on living shoreline work and oysters and so forth. And frankly, universities are cheaper than your typical environmental consultant. No offense, Chris. So we work a lot with universities in that regard. So we have those sorts of things costed out, and we've been in discussions with them. Restoration dollars are really hard to find. As Eric mentioned earlier, we competed nationally in order to get this money. Monitoring dollars are even tougher to find. The way we've downsized the government over the last dozen years or so, we've seen a lot of our monitoring programs go away. And it's unfortunate because a lot of that monitoring data would be useful as we try to answer your questions today. So we do bare bones monitoring of things like water quality and fishes and so forth, and that's too bad. But what I will say is this. We have some in-house money within FWC, but it's competitive. So I will be putting together a monitoring plan. It's due the end of November. I'm warning my boss who's sitting in the audience, it's coming to you. But you might ask yourself, well, how much money do you have? Statewide, we have $300,000. That's it. And that's to do restoration projects and the monitoring of restoration projects. So we're talking about small pots of money, unfortunately, when it comes to doing the monitoring. So we're going to do the best we can. We're going to work with as many partners as we can. We're going to do it as cheaply as we can. We're going to look at as many organismal groups as we can, plants versus fishes versus birds, etc. So we're going to do the best we can and beat every bush and find as much money as we can. But that's the reality of the world we live in now.
Here's a question from Dave Farlow, but I've heard this question, frankly, all up and down the East Coast. So I think that you've heard this before. How do we know whether or not there's DDT bound up in the spoil sites? Have we tested for that? Will there be testing during the course of the project? And should we be concerned about if it is there, if it's released into the water column, what the current effects of that would be today? What can we say about that? It's a good question.
To the best of our knowledge, DDT was not applied to this area for mosquito control. As I mentioned, our contractor went out today and took samples through the project area. And in terms of what we do, I think that's really going to be guided on what results we get back. I'm not anticipating seeing concentrations of DDT. And just to be clear, it isn't just DDT we're looking for. We're looking for the breakdown products, DDD, DDE, and the whole suite of other organochlorine pesticides. So that's dieldrin, chlordanes, toxaphene, the whole suite. So we'll have more data from this site in a couple weeks.
Okay. Jeff, what's been your experience with your agency with this issue? I know this has come up in other areas.
Well, it's mostly happened in the freshwater world.
Okay.
Not so much in the saltwater world. As Eric mentioned, for most counties, we look back through those long records of mosquito control. You really don't see too much usage.
All right. I knew there had to be a fishing question in this pile somewhere. This is from Brandon Risley, I think is the name. A portion of the monies for this project was derived from outboard motor and fishing gear taxes. These are taxes from the majority of people who are in the audience who are against this project, he says. We've not talked to one fisherman from any of the other projects that have been worked on that have said there's been an increase in fishing or water quality or their livelihoods. If you have had this great success, where are the people for it? Why don't you have the support of all the previous project stakeholders, fishermen in their communities? Why is it that we have 100 or more people here against it and we don't have that many people here for it? There you go. This is where I get out of the way and let you guys answer the question.
Your conversation you had?
Sure. I'll do the last part of it first. I wouldn't say that there are people who aren't for it. I mean, we've talked to some of your fishing guides, and without giving away their favorite fishing holes, we'll tell you that they pointed to natural marsh as the best fishing in this area. And this project is to restore, as best we can, that natural marsh function. We talked to folks that capture mudfish, killifishes, that they use as bait. That's a great indicator of a healthy marsh. They showed us where they collect those specimens. It's in the natural marsh. In terms of what we know about this area, in terms of fish surveys of the past, unfortunately the data is really spotty. It's not like further south in the Indian River Lagoon where we have a 30-year data set where we've never had any gaps, right? We've been able to have continuous funding there, so when things happen like algal blooms, we can really tweak the data and understand what's happened over time. We don't have that here. What we have is snapshots of fish surveys here, 3-year windows of snapshots. And they do teach us, a little bit about the area. One of the things it teaches us is for the sampling that was done as close to the project area as we can get, for those areas, our catch per unit effort, CPUE, which is a really traditional way to look at fisheries data, for the seine, so you're looking at the seine net, 21-meter seine net, for the smallest fishes, it was the lowest catch per unit effort in the region between St. Augustine and Ponce Inlet. So in terms of your smallest fishes, it gave us the lowest numbers within that region. Now in terms of a totally different gear type, the trawl data, so that's a big net that you drag behind a boat in deeper areas, it was the highest. So it's letting you know that the larger specimens that you catch in a trawl, the area's doing pretty well compared to others. But as far as the smaller ones, it's not doing as well compared to others. And it's the smaller ones that are of most interest to us because we know that when you restore marshes, it's the small fishes that are getting in, eating these small invertebrates, eating those marsh residents that I mentioned earlier. And so that's what's critically important to it. But the take-home message here is this. The scientific literature is pretty clear. There's strong lines of evidence that it's the area of wetland that's most important. So if you look at large-scale studies that look at multiple estuaries around the U.S. or around the world, what you find is that ratio of wetland to open water is what's critically important. That's where you get the best commercial fisheries. That's where you get shrimp production. And if I were to try to pick, a particular trophic group that I would want to look at in terms of restoration of this area, it'd probably be shrimp. You've got 3 species here, brown, pink, and white. The most important commercial fishery in the state of Florida, economically, by the way, is your shrimping industry. And it's that particular group where you can really look at area of wetland versus production, because those shrimp get up close to those marsh grasses like the cordgrass and whatnot. So there's lots of evidence that those areas are particularly important. So as we look forward to monitoring this and creating a new fisheries design for monitoring it, we want to look very closely to the project area. And so we'll be looking at using maybe block netting around those areas where the water interfaces with the wetland, and it'll be especially important to see things like shrimp data. And the shrimp, by the way, very important up the food chain. We've all fished with live shrimp. We know everything likes it, so very important.
This is maybe a follow-up question to that, and maybe you answered some of it from Bob Augusto. After more than 18 years of completing various dragline ditch restoration projects, are there any specific scientific studies on the results from that in terms of water quality or fish populations? Why does the Water Management District continue to support and push forward with this destructive and highly questionable experimental program? So there you go. Oh, maybe that was a district question. He got the science part, so we'll toss it back to Eric.
Well, there have been a number of studies, dissertations, which have specifically looked at these sorts of restoration efforts, and they show, just as Jeff said, the importance of wetland area to the production of the things we really want to see in these areas, and that's the biomass up the food chain of things that are edible to the fish we care about, and the area of nursery to take that production and get it to the size where we want to see it. So, I mean, on the frequently asked question page, there was quite a bit of data from some dissertations and reports that addressed those questions of have we studied these areas, and I think we have.
Okay. This is from Paul Harrington. Wetlands once extended from North Flagler Beach to Mantanzas Inlet. They were lost to Palm Coast development and development along the ICW. How are these wetlands more important than those? How are these wetlands more important than those that were affected by stormwater issues? And how is this area affected by the Flagler Beach sewage treatment water releases?
I think the way I look at this restoration project is we're fixing a structural problem. We've got uplands where there should be wetland, and we've got ditches where there should be wetland. If we come in one time and take that pile of spoil and put it back to the elevation it should be, where it's tidally inundated, put that material into the ditches where it's at the elevation where it tidally inundates, we walk away. We don't have to if it's done right, we shouldn't have to do anything. There is no maintenance after the fact. We've corrected the structural problem. The wetland can begin to function on its own more successfully. That's very different than a wetland that's being impacted by stormwater or wastewater. Unless we go in and, remove that wastewater treatment plant or reroute it someplace else, then we're in the situation of, okay, we need to maybe upgrade that plant. So it's producing more, less nutrient enrichment to the area. It's a more incremental approach. You have to stay on it. Whereas this is a one-time come in and fix it. It's kind of field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. And the maintenance takes care of itself.
This back to the link between the habitat and water quality. This is from Brandon Rilsey, I think. It's a long question, but I want to try to frame it. During the time of construction, there's going to be some loss of vegetation. Some vegetation is going to go in the water. Will that contribute to increased nutrients and lowering the water quality during this period of time? And and during this period of time, do we lose the capacity of those wetlands to do their job in filtering this water to make it better?
I think the effects are going to be very short-lived during the construction period. The measure that we talked about as being the most important during the project is turbidity. And what we've seen is that when we have done this project in other places, we don't see turbidity violations. That's not to say we don't continue to look for them, we do, but we just haven't seen it. What we see are fluctuations in turbidity, fluctuations in water quality around the areas within which we're doing these projects, and that water quality varies for a whole variety of reasons, but there's no data to support it has anything to do with what we're doing right here. It's changing for a whole variety, seasonal reasons, changes in rainfall, a bloom occurs. So ultimately, long term, that wetland area is very important in helping with water quality improvement. It's rarely good enough, strong enough all by itself to completely reverse a water quality impairment, but there's a linkage between the water quality improvement and the sustainability of these wetlands. These wetlands filter the water. Sometimes you hear people refer to them as kidneys. The water flows in with its particulate matter, the detritus, it gets trapped in the vegetation. Some of that is eaten, some of that becomes soil, and in that way these wetlands can grow in elevation. That's important right now because we're in a time when sea levels are rising. If that marsh elevation is static, if the wetland isn't functioning well enough, you're not trapping enough material, water is rising, and we see the ditches getting wider. So what we really want to do is create more wetland area that functions to trap particulate matter, grow the height of the wetland. So on the one hand, we're helping filter, improve water quality. At the same time, we're building soils that allow this wetland to be sustainable, and hopefully in light of sea level rise, it will be a wetland that's productive on into the future.
I like this question, and I think I'm going to ask all of you to weigh on it because I think you're going to have an interesting perspective. It's from Ray Bacall, and it's about what you've learned in doing a number of these projects going forward. What do you consider success? What goes into the management plan, or maybe it's the permit, as to say what makes a successful project? And as you've done several of these along the way, moving north from south of where I live to northern part of Volusia, what have you learned and what have you changed as you've moved through this project?
I've worked on a number of wetland restoration projects, primarily regrading of spoil deposition sites. Similar to dragline ditching, I've also worked in conjunction with a lot of dragline ditch projects. And in any of those projects that we've worked on, what we've found is elevation is key. In any tidal system, in any tidal wetland, if you get the right elevation, the vegetation comes in and the system functions as it should. And that is and that is going back to the very first project that I ever did. I came up with a really nice grade plan and went back and checked myself and found out that my grade plan was wrong. And I learned, fortunately, before we started the project, that I had made a mistake. I had based my elevations on tidal history, and I had not gone out into the adjacent marshes and checked in the field. So what I've found and what I've learned in my 20 plus years of restoring tidal marshes is identify your target elevations in your existing marshes, and your system will function.
All right, he took mine. That's not fair. I was going to say elevation as well, that centimeters or inches count. And if you don't dial those in perfectly, you won't get the plant species that you're hoping for, and therefore the animal species. But I say a second big lesson learned for me is that a lot of these things in terms of the faunal community response, the response of the fishes and invertebrates and the birds, that they're all pretty predictable. And I understand when people come to us and say, you didn't study this particular project area, how could you possibly know what's going to happen? because a lot of these things are very repeatable all over the nation, all over the world, honestly. It's dealing with a lot of the same species or trophic groups, right? Fishes that either eat detritus or eat certain invertebrates or eat one another. And all those things are fairly predictable.
I don't have much experience in the district's saltwater wetland restoration work, relatively new to that. I've got a fair bit of experience on the freshwater side. And I take great heart in seeing areas that I saw decades ago, in how bad they looked, how they weren't providing services for our waterways, and now are places where we're providing important water quality benefits for adjacent waterways, where the wildlife is teeming, where people come and say, could you get rid of the alligators? I'd like to duck hunt more here because I'm not putting my dogs in the water because I really like being out here. If you go Google Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive, there are Facebook pages teeming with photographs from some of our properties of just the beauty of the wildlife out there. So I take great comfort in seeing the recovery of wetlands throughout the district and what they're providing for people, what they're providing for our water resources, and what they're providing for fish and wildlife.
That's good. This, let's see, this is Michael Tolbert. I've lost it. We got to get this right. Let's see. It was a big old excavator or drag line that made all these ditches out there. You're going to be putting a big piece of equipment out there to do the restoration. What kind of actions are taking? What do you do to minimize the adverse effects of that piece of equipment while you're doing the restoration?
Well, that'll be one of my primary functions, is to work in conjunction with the equipment operators, working out in front of them, identifying courses and routes and navigation paths for them to transport the machine between work areas to ensure that no critical habitats, primarily oyster reefs, are impacted. So that will be working with the excavators hands-on, or working with the equipment operators hands-on in the field will be the primary assurance that we will have as minimal impact on any critical habitat as possible. And the other point to be made too is I understand that the sheer size of this machine is intimidating. It's a 60-foot long boom on the excavator. It's 30 feet long. It's got wide tracks, but the fact of the matter is the wide tracks on this machine are what makes it less invasive because it's lower ground bearing pressure, it floats, and so while I understand that it might be somewhat intimidating, it's actually less impactful due to its size.
A couple of just pretty specific ones from Margaret Russo. What's the budget for this project? How much money is being spent on it? I know that's in the FAQ somewhere.
536,000, I think.
Yeah, with all the partner dollars together.
Coming together.
Yes.
Okay.
And if I could add to that, it's one of the cheapest wetland restoration techniques in the world. We've received national recognition for the fact that it's one of the cheapest. Usually when you restore wetlands, it's somewhere on the order of $30,000 to $60,000 per acre. That's what they pay in Louisiana, for example. And we're a whole lot cheaper than that.
And let me see, well, I'm not going to ask a question that no one put their name on, so how you go? Well, maybe I will anyway. Why was this project picked? Why are we here in Flagler County doing this project here and not doing one up away in St. Johns County or finishing up in Volusia?
Well, our work in Volusia County was in direct coordination with Volusia County. It was their piece of equipment. So the partnership was funneling dollars to them to use their equipment with their operator. When that piece of equipment broke down and the county was in a position to not be able to continue to do the work, We had to look for a new source of that equipment, and quite frankly, while this piece of equipment is perfectly suited for this work, it's not real common, so it took us a while to find the right piece of equipment that we could get contractually from a private contractor. So in terms of the location, we had been working in Volusia County, which is just down the line, and so it made sense to look for some place where we had expectations based on our nearby work that we would have similar conditions and the similar techniques would result in the similar benefits.
Easy question, I guess. Who's the contractor? Has that been picked?
Harry.
Para or Perry?
Harry.
Perry. Okay, this is from Chris Herrera. Will the project work impede, such as grading of the islands, placing turbidity screens, excavator working in ditches, impede the boat navigation through the area and limit access during construction? Will the finished project block off existing navigational channels used to access the ICW given the limited access currently in place due to shallow depths and oyster bars in the area?
Turbidity curtains obviously will be in place in gaps in particular working areas around as the excavator is working in a particular work area, and then for a time probably up to 2 months in that particular work area after the excavator has moved on to the next working area. And then excavator may be working in the next working area for say up to a month or a few weeks, and turbidity curtains will be in place there. So for a period of maybe 3 months, a particular working area may be cut off with turbidity curtains, and then those turbidity curtains will be moved and leapfrogged to the next site coming up. Access won't necessarily be restricted to those areas. If you've got a canoe and you can push your canoe over the turbidity curtain, then you can have access to the area after the excavator has moved on to the next working area. As far as navigation channels, we were out, we've been making multiple trips out almost every week over the last couple of months, and we're actually out yesterday and have the green lines that we have on the on your handout and on the slide. We've run all of these navigation channels. We're going to leave open, and so there will be significant navigation channels that will not be impacted at all. And even in the areas that aren't marked in green, we know that we don't have enough spoil to completely fill the ditch. So the expectation is that the majority of these ditches will actually still remain open. So we will make efforts to maintain specific navigation channels, and the rest of the navigation channels should remain somewhat navigable as well.
I feel like I'm approaching, Your Honor, may I approach the witness? I want to give you something to look at while I ask this question. You object. All right. I've showed you Exhibit A here, which looks to be like photos from, is it the Cedar Creek project in Volusia County? And I'm sure, are you familiar with this one, Jeff? Yep. Okay, and here are the questions. This project was done several years ago. If the mission was to restore it to pre-1960 conditions, why are the ditches still there? It's been 2 years. Where's the substantial natural recruitment? What's the evidence of new growth and renewal since then?
Okay, so this is the Cedar Island area in Volusia County. I don't know exactly when these pictures were taken, post-project. Oh, okay, thanks. I suspect maybe two to 3 years post-project, and I guess in here, Mike?
The first figure is 2010. We did that island in 2010. right north of my lease, that's
Right.
Figure A.
Right.
Figure B is 2012.
Okay.
It came back to the area of the island on the other side
Right.
of that island. And figure C is much younger.
Okay.
One of my questions, you want me to ask?
Well, I asked the questions,
Yeah, I just,
and we, and
yeah,
I
I just
need
wanted
to, I got to
to confirm
get through a
exactly
bunch
what
of
the
these.
dates were. So it's what I suspected. So what we're looking at is aerials that were taken roughly 1 to 3 years post-project in these aerials you've given us. So, and the point to be made is it takes time for Mother Nature to do her thing. I mean, we put the elevation back to marsh, real marsh elevation instead of spoil pile elevation, and it does take time for that recovery to take place. Some areas are faster than others. You know, the good news is there's a tremendous seed bank in this system of all the plants that we're hoping for that will move into these areas, and they do. In our minds, it's very quick, but we live in the restoration world. We also do coral reef restoration, where the ultimate goal is 100 years from now. So to us, for things to respond within 5 to 10 years is fast to us. So but we understand where people might look at it and say, it's not fast in our mind. But, you know, Eric mentioned something earlier, and that is, we looked at something very similar, where we took basically an elongated spoil pile, that is an impoundment dike, and we flattened that back out, and we tracked plants over time. It was part of a dissertation work that was done at University of Central Florida. And what we saw was the plants came back to be with exactly like a natural area within about 2 years. It happens very quickly in some areas, more slowly in others. So I can't tell you exactly how quickly it will happen, but what we can show you is aerials, or it'd be better to take you onto the ground, honestly, to some of these areas that are 18 years old or 17 years old, 16, etc. We could show you all these areas where this has happened. It's tough to look at from an aerial. If you get on the ground, it's easier to see, you know, these plants coming in.
Right.
But I will add one more thing to it, if I can, Chris.
Yeah.
And that is, we actually want some areas not to have any plants. I know it's not something we talk about a lot, but there's a habitat type that's been completely lost in the discussion here. It's called salt barren. And it's areas that don't have plants, probably because they get very salty. That's the scientific explanation for why it happens. But they're very important for certain species, especially wading birds that are trying to nest, shorebirds that are trying to nest. So if we don't get plants on every square inch of what we restore, that's okay with us, because there's some important habitat value in salt barren.
And I can speak to a certain extent to this specific area, because I've done over 100 acres of spoil deposition site restoration, all within a mile or so of these particular sites. So with regard to recruitment and succession of salt marsh vegetation into these areas quickly afterwards, I can tell you that it's very fast in this particular area. So we're talking about some areas don't recruit quite as quickly as others, and some do. With this area right here, particularly with the mangroves, we see almost immediate mangrove recruitment back into those areas that have been excavated and regraded, and we're talking about somewhere on the order of 100 plus acres that we've done, and we see it happen very quickly.
This looks to be a follow-up question, or at least one related to the same area, from Brent Brown from New Smyrna. The 2015 restoration was incomplete due to equipment failure, and yet project leaders still declare it a success. How can a project be declared a success without a completion? And then, you know, what is the definition of failure? And is it true that some of this restoration was done on private lands? You want to take that?
I'll take a swing at that. I think it's a bit of how do you define success? If you define success as in the area where the work was completed, did you get the ground leveled to your target elevation? Are you seeing the plants come back in like you expected? If yes, where we were able to do the work, it was done successfully. If you look at it from the whole project, we wanted to restore all of this. Well, no, the equipment broke down and we were incomplete because we didn't even work here. So on the one hand, no, we didn't finish everything we had planned, but we didn't have the opportunity because the equipment broke down. On the place where we did the work, it worked. Now, in terms of the question about work on private property, this work, we want it to be done on state land, sovereign lands, and we go through a lot of effort to try and ensure that. So we were quite surprised in 2015, after the equipment had broken down, that we get contacted by someone who's making a claim that it's private, a portion of it is private property. We turned around and said, hello, state lands, DEP, can you help us understand this information that's coming in? Because part of the permitting process with DEP is, do you agree that this is state land? Yes, they said. Do we have your permission to work on state lands? Yes, you do. So in 2015, we got this notice that someone's claiming that this is private property. We wait 2 years, roughly, 2017, I believe. State Lands comes back and said, yes, part of this is private property. However, if you go on the Volusia County Property Appraiser's website to this day, it says it's state. So there's still some confusion about that. And in fact, there has been someone who very recently sent us a claim that say they own part of it privately. So we are working our way through that. Now, to the issue of whether public funds were now expended on restoration on private land, we have worked through what is that footprint, assuming the first claim that private property is correct. Okay, here's the footprint. How much did we expend? We've figured out what that amount is. We've talked with our partners, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and FWC, and said, how do you want us to proceed? We can either roll these monies into a project, we can cut you a check. We will do whatever you think is right, because we understand that these public dollars should not have been expended on private property. However, we had no idea that it was private property, and that determination is still cooking based on the recent claim by somebody else.
Here's a question from Billy Anderson, who says he's a clammer on a clam farm just north of the area. It's a third generation business. What's going to be the effect on local aquaculture?
Okay, I'll take it. I would point to the water quality data set that was analyzed as part of one of the FAQs that came out recently, where they looked at water quality both on the long-term basis and the short-term basis. So they have long-term monitoring stations that they can crunch data from that. But on the short term, we looked at an island just south of Cedar Island that we spoke of recently, and that was Shipyard Island. So we looked at water quality on a short-term basis, and what we see there is that there's really no effects of the project on water quality that's discernible from the work that's being done. And so we don't anticipate that it would have any effect on aquaculture.
I think we may have answered this, but let's try to there's several questions like this. If mangroves are so important, why are we knocking down mangroves to protect wetlands?
Yeah.
Are we going to be destroying mangroves, and are we planting mangroves in their place?
Right, it's a great question. Mangroves are absolutely important, and for that reason we're trying to create more mangrove habitat. That's what happens in this process. Now, we will be taking down some mangroves. The spoil piles have a perimeter of mangroves on them, and that some of them will have to be destroyed as part of this process. But you're creating that wetland elevation that's perfect for the salt marsh grasses. And salt marsh grasses, by the way, do a tremendous job of preparing the soil, chemically speaking, and also trapping the propagules for mangroves. So generally what you see is the marsh grasses come in first and the mangroves quickly follow. We see that on every salt marsh restoration that we do, no matter what type of restoration we do in this region. So yes, mangroves are part of the project, very important part of the project, and there will be loads of mangroves that come back as a result of this.
We're real close. I'm down almost. Well, I'm trying to make sure we get everybody's questions answered, and we're down here to where I think we've just about gotten everybody's done. I just, let me ask you all this. We're about to hear public comment, and you know there are a lot of people who have questions about this. We've answered a lot of their questions tonight. What do you say to them, in terms of, why do we need to do this project, even though we know we have a lot of people here in the community that have a lot of concerns about it? All right, want to go first?
Well, the first thing I'd say is we look at the imagery over time and we see the area of wetland decreasing. That's not beneficial to a lot of the things that you and I care about. So in order to try and create this system so that it is sustainable over time, we need intact, healthy, functioning wetlands, and the larger the better. And the whole point of this project is to take an area that's got bumps and ditches and try and get it to the level where it ought to be so it's tidally inundated so we get that wetland area. It's really that simple.
Okay. And we have one question here, almost unrelated, but it's a good question, and I may answer it. And the question is, why are there so many officers present? It's a sign of the times. We're in a public meeting, and we have officers present, and it's for our own protection. And in it that we hate to be able to say that, but isn't it a little comforting that we've got people whose job it is to protect us? So I'll answer that one.
We also answered some resource questions tonight also.
That's also true. These are officers, but they're also resource officers. And my guess is they know more about the fishing in this area than anyone else. How's that? So ask them a question. Okay, all right, maybe I'm wrong. There were a number of people who told me their name and address and didn't say anything, and I'm assuming they want to speak. Let me ask people who are interested in speaking to work their way over here to the mic. Let's get a line going. We're going to get a timer going. We got 2 minutes. We got enough time to get people's comments. Don't be offended when I tell you your time's up. We got to move on to somebody else because we really do want to get your comments heard. And I apologize if I didn't ask your question. There were some of these that, well, first of all, we ran out of time, but second, there were just a number of these that were just look like the others. So, we ready? We ready? Tell us your
Mike
name.
Sullivan. Mike Sullivan. I'm the one that put up these pictures right here. My question was, by not maintaining barriers and revegetating, are you just, in fact, removing the spoil piles and letting Mother Nature wash out your work, returning the area to exactly what it was before you started? Because I went to my area in Volusia County last week, and what I saw was an awful lot like what I used to have. There were mangroves coming back in, but the ditches were still there, and they were just like they were. So I think they put this stuff in there, they do this work, they don't put the barriers up, and they're not going to revegetate. When you get a nor'easter in there, it's going to wash all that out, and what you're going to get is the ditch again, and it's going to regrow just like it did before. So that's what I'm seeing in Volusia County, and that's what we're going to get here if they don't put barriers up and revegetate.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Billy Anderson. This is my son, Finn. My father was Mike's partner back in a few years ago, and I saw what happened in New Smyrna with the replenishment, and it just caused total destruction. And I think the trickle effect that this will have on the area will be tremendously, I don't know the word, but not too good. So thank you anyway.
Thank you, and thank you, Finn. That was good. Yes, sir.
How you doing? My name's Paul Haight. I am president of the Friends of Gamble Rogers State Park. We're not funded by the state.
Thank you for what you said there. But honestly, you are one of the very few that have told us the positive side of this. And I'm being 100% honest. When this first started, they told us what they were going to do. And within days, I had no clue what drag ditch restoration was. And like I've said before, I've learned more about it in 2 months than I ever want to learn in my life. But we had a gut feeling, man, there may be some negative sides to this. You're taking mature oak trees, you're taking mature palm trees, mangroves, thriving estuary, taking the material, putting it in the water. Common sense. Maybe there's something wrong with that. You know, maybe there is a negative side. I get it. We got some positive side, but let's find out if there's something negative. So we reached out. Via social media. We reached out via email. And you know what we got? Negative, 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 negative after negative response. And that's why we're here. Look, I'm not a scientist. I can be a Google expert and try to figure out this stuff, but I'm going off of individuals' experiences who have lived it. They've lived this restoration. They've been a part of it. It's their communities that have been affected by it. And I'm listening to them. And that's the overwhelming response that we've got. And that's what scares us. So, Paul, you got up here and you said your piece. But where are the rest? How come when we send out emails and I go to areas that have had this type exact same, and we're talking about drag ditch, that's it. There's a lot of different type of restorations. We understand that. A lot of them work, a lot of them are great, but we're talking about drag ditch restoration, the way they do it with the amphibious excavator. And we've asked, how's the fishing? How's the habitat? Did it recover the way they said? What's going on? And I'm looking for honest answers, and we're getting negative response. The fishing's destroyed, the habitat's destroyed, it didn't come back, our water quality has gone down. So our fear is based on others' experience. That's why we're here. And listen, I just want to do something really quick. Raise the hands of who's against this project. And that's it. I mean, the stakeholders are speaking. The stakeholders are here. The community has spoken. Part of the steps, the 51-step process that Chip referenced, published material, is embrace the community. Not only embrace the community and educate the community needs to embrace the project as well and want the project. Nobody in Flagler Beach wants it. As simple as that.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, sir.
I'm Chuck Gleichman. I'm president of Flagler Sport Fishing Club. I'm here tonight to kind of update you where we stand in this process. After careful consideration, we feel as a club that we can't support this restoration project. Okay, our local fishery continues to decline here due to a number of factors, including increased fishing pressure, water quality, and weather. The area under consideration currently provides some of the best fishing in South Flagler County. We take the position from a fishing perspective, if it's not broke, don't fix it. There's no data specific to the area under consideration concerning fish population, and the data provided specifically states, okay, from St. John's Water Management, it requires years of restored areas to recruit plants and build a similar habitat structure productivity to natural marshes. Research shows a lag time for ecosystem services to respond. Restoring wetlands may not yield an immediate and obvious increase in fish, but it represents a sensible and proven strategy to safeguard fish population. And it goes on to talk about a timeline of 25 years. Conclusion basically is, you know, this is a small area that we catch fish in, and as the habitat in other areas in our county continues to decline, you know, this is an area that's close and dear to our heart that we want to see maintained. Okay, I've been involved in this from the get-go, and we have gone from the pitch from St. John's to improving we're going to improve water quality to water quality will not be adversely affected. And we've gone from producing so many pounds of fish food per year to it may produce 50 pounds. Comparison to the work done in North Peninsula Park was a totally different strategy in most cases, where in fact they remove fill, they burn bushes, they burn trees rather than drive them back into the ground. As I've stated before, the club supports improvement in water quality and habitat is all possible ways. And we have a number of times asked St. John's Water Management that we'll be more than happy to help them select any areas within Flagler County that we can help them with.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Todd Mostiller. I'm the Vice President of the Florida Water Quality Association. I've got some good friends of mine that live in this area. I've got one that's a customer of mine, and I'm talking on their behalf, basically. My question card I turned in was not answered, and that's the reason I'm up here. The first thing I want to preach, the guys that I preach to, is it all starts with a water test. So the people that are in the community asked me to go out and take a water sample, and I got the blessing from the St. Johns River Water Management to do so. So I took samples in the project area. I took one on 100, State Road 100, and I took one down at High Bridge Point. And I took the chlorophyll samples, I did the turbidity samples, I did the nitrogen samples, I did the nitrate samples. You can't start a project, guys. I can't size equipment, I can't do my job unless we know where we're starting at, ground point zero, to say, hey, what have we accomplished? What is the outcome? 2, 3 years, 5 years down the road, okay? I kind of feel like now we're talking about, okay, now we're going to turbidity. We're not doing chlorophyll now, okay? Well, they're just out now buying a meter for turbidity. I got the test results back from a state certified lab today, and guess what? The turbidity levels are within state drinking guidelines. They're below the 5 and the 0.5 within drinkable guidelines that estuary is out there right now. I just wanted to share that with you. But my question is, when the chlorophyll levels are dropping, in the years past, if you look at the chart, how can you start a project without a water test? And the water test that they did was 3 miles away, okay? The real bad place is from State Road 100, north going to Palm Coast. That's a real bad area. You can pull it up on the website. It's definitely a bad thing. And my question is, what was the turbidity levels at the time of permitting when St. Johns River Water Management pulled that permit out? That's a good one. I'd like to know what they came back, so maybe we can cross-examine those figures on that. And some of the disturbing things, as I was sitting in and listening to some of the discussions, how can the Audubon Society endorse this project when they haven't even done a bird count, guys? I mean, there's just facts and facts out there that there's nothing being said. Oh no, we never did a bird count. I mean, that's kind of disturbing. So, you guys kind of have to really get your ducks in a row for me to endorse this project. I don't endorse this project. I don't know how anybody can endorse this project.
All right. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Sandra Schulteis, and I am also a Flagler County resident, and I have been a real estate broker for 30-odd years, and I will tell you that right now, when they impact the waterway system for these people to be able to access the intercoastal waterway, and it will happen. There is no way that you guys can predict Mother Nature and how the next 20 years or whatever, what storms, what everything is going to wash all this mud and this silt and this sediment. Plus, it's also going to prove that chlorophyll is going to increase when they dump all this stuff in, cover it up with whatever soil they can get, which, by the way, they can't get a lot of. The other thing is, they're doing this on the cheap. He just said it down there. This is the cheapest project they've done. We are going to get what we pay for, and the county taxpayer dollars are going to pay for the rest of their lives in this county, because there is no way they can continue to monitor this property with the funds that you have already said that they've got $300,000. They're not monitoring it. They will not be able to. Financially, they will not. So the taxpayer dollars and our county is going to suffer as a result. Guaranteed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi, my name is Rick Alford. I live here in Flagler Beach, Flagler County. My house, my yard goes right into the proposed area. I'm sure you've heard most of our concerns. It just scares me that they had $540,000 is near what their budget is for this. And in the beginning, they were just railroading it through. If we hadn't have gone out to Palatka, we wouldn't be here talking. They would already be out there doing it. Only because of our concerns, we're finally, you guys are attempting to create a plan, and it's changing every day. And I think it's just too risky for you guys to go out there and tear up a beautiful estuary that we can't see any problem with. And, just to go out there and risk or navigation or their access to the intercoastal, water quality, the fishing and recreation out there, which is going to harm our economy too. And just for the fact that you have that $540,000 or roughly budget, and now you've added these you're going to monitor the water and made some changes to this thing. I don't think you guys have the budget to do it right. I think it's spreading it too thin. I don't see how you could even effectively monitor this for $540,000. I just feel like you come in and you're just bullying us and our estuary here. It's a beautiful place. It's not broken. It should be left alone. Why mess with it? Why risk all those things? Our voice is getting, bigger and bigger, and we're not hearing one good word from any of these other projects, similar projects. We're not talking about some freshwater area. We're talking about this type of project. We're not hearing one person come up in favor of it. And I think this voice is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think we're going to have to go on to the next place and help defend their area. And you know what? Most of us aren't, never even done this type of thing, had to really fight for our environment for any reason like this. It's just amazing we're fighting somebody that says they're here to try to help our environment. But I think they need to do their homework and just leave us alone.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Rob Rothman. My wife and I have lived along the project area for close to 30 years, and when I first heard about the project, before I even knew what a ditch or drag line was, I was in disbelief. I didn't believe my neighbor. And now, of course, I look at the beautiful area behind our house and what's planned for it, and I'm still in disbelief. It's hard to believe that there aren't other areas in the county or the state that couldn't better have these dollars spent on it. Is this an area that's in degradation and trouble? Well, they say that there's, the canals are getting bigger. Certainly we haven't sensed that over the years. And, it's sort of overwhelming to try to compete with all of the science that's laid out and sounds so logical, and then hear the horror stories of similar projects that have been done in the area. And then after all of that, only 40% of the project area is going to be restored to wetlands at best case. So we have a lot of risk here, turning over earth, vegetation, things that come back, risk for a problem that's in search of a solution. There is no problem here. We're happy here. There's no one living in the area here that thinks it's a good idea. As I said at one of the other meetings, if the situation where, there was, the Cuyahoga River was on fire behind our house, we'd all be in favor of restoring it to where it should be. But there's nothing wrong here. And it's just unconscionable to me that we would take the risk of hurting this beautiful area in the name of science. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karen Jesse, and I'm a homeowner in the project area. And I had my soapbox that would be similar type stories, but I decided that I wanted to address like 3 different things that I heard tonight and see if maybe there could be work done beyond on that. I've been kind of hailed as the mosquito person. It's a real concern to me, and I hear what you say about mosquito control. The ditches were dug to control mosquitoes. We're going to undo it. We're going to actually increase the mosquito population for the fish to eat it. I saw the slides in a September presentation of the ones that flew away. It was graphically depicted. So it sounds to me like increased population regardless of the functionality of it. And I haven't heard, I hear in the other areas, it doesn't sound like it's increased. However, and it goes back to money to monitor, there's no results telling us that it really was not an increase in population. And on top of that, there has been the first EEE vector-driven disease in Volusia County, whether it's related to this or not. It happened where these projects were undertaken, and a lot of dog heartworm. So it's a concern about that. I also heard about the wetlands being sustainable, and I just want to ask the question if they are. Someone on staff even pointed out to us areas that look just like the dragline ditch, but they've been naturally done because the ICW has had an effect on the environment. So if we spend all this money and take this action, yeah, it's nice to do it and maybe we put it off, but is it inevitable that this becomes again this type of an environment? And finally, on the storm surge, we weren't talking, didn't feel real good about that answer. We were not talking about evacuating or not because mangroves would let us stay in our homes. It worked for us, and we've had storm surge, and it's about property protection, not us evacuating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Captain Chris Ferreira, local fishing guide for the last 15 years here in Flagler County, resident for 30 years. Now I'm here on behalf of my guides, Flagler County guides, specifically the ones that attended your meeting on October 17th. So during the FAQs, there was a question asked. Some fishing guides were unable to attend a recent workshop. Will the partners meet with them to gather information about important fishing spots? Which you guys replied in your answer. On October 17th, 2018, the FWC coordinated a meeting between local fishing guides and the partners. The guides provided an input on the footprint of the project and comments about there being lots of fish near sites of previous projects in Volusia County. They also stated that they were glad to hear that the focus is to restore marsh habitat because of its importance for fisheries production. They also noted that open water adjacent to natural non-spoiled marshes in the region provide some of the best fishing opportunities. Well, I'm here to tell you there's a lot of misinformation in this. The statements that you have, or your answer that you replied, I'd like to make it clear to the public, to the board, and to the partners. The meeting was set on October 17 was not described as a meeting with the partners. When the guides arrived, they all expressed to me, I couldn't be there that day, that they were surprised to see the partners were there joining the meeting with the FWC. Another thing was, in the answer provided to the district, it states, the guides provided input on the footprint of the project and comments about there being lots of fish near sites of previous projects in Volusia County. The area that has lots of fish near the sites of previous projects are on the east side of the ICW near Highbridge in Volusia County and do not involve dragline ditching. The area always held fish because the shoreline was not the main focus of your project. The areas in Volusia County where dragline ditch restoration was done no longer holds the amount of game fish we had seen in the past and continue to be poor fishing. Captain Jim was one of the guides that attended your meeting. He couldn't be here tonight, so he wrote a statement for me to read to you. He says, there's some contradiction in what is claimed. He goes, what I said is there's good fishing in open water adjacent to non-spoiled marshes. The good fishing area I was referring to is the non-restored ditches that are similar to the dragline ditch restoration proposed area. So what he said was taken out of context. He's comparing apples to apples. So I want to make it clear, the fishing guides do not support this project. Okay. So we ask that you please don't quote us for that meeting or whatever it is, or twist our words, because you do not have our support. And I speak specifically for the guides that attended that meeting.
Okay,
Thank you.
All right. I've done my best to get everybody heard that. It's 7:29. We're going to that's it. I'm cutting y'all off here, but we're going to hear you out. I'm just try to be brief, and I'm glad we got everybody a chance. Go ahead.
All right. My name's Lynn Flannery. I'm a Flagler County resident, and I am an environmental professional. I've worked in the field for about 20 years. Being an environmental professional is a calling, and it's a passion that you have in your gut, and it's your goal to do right by Mother Nature. And I believe that the scientists and other environmental professionals involved in this project will do their best to make sure everything comes out correctly and do the best they can to restore things the way as best they can to make it ecologically return to its natural force or natural way. Every day when I drive around and I see the continued construction, it concerns me. Each acre that becomes a home means more herbicide, more pesticide, maybe another septic tank, and we keep causing more harm to Mother Nature. And I know we can't stop the development, but this is our opportunity to do something in the right direction, giving back to Mother Nature.
Thank you.
There's a proverb that says, when is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When is the second best time to plant a tree? Today. And I feel the same about restoration, and I support the project. I hope it moves forward.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Bill Prouse. I've been fishing these waters and living here for 6 decades. I live on the water right next to this area. You can see my roof in the aerial photograph. And we need better fishing here, and I support the science. I support the scientists, and I support this project. What I don't support is people coming up here and voicing their concerns about the project where they have ulterior motives, like they're thinking of just themselves or how this is going to impact their property values. You got to look beyond that, folks. You just got to. You got to look at this planet as being our only planet, and we got to protect it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Jim Rosso. I just bought a condo here in Flagler Beach. I love the area. I hate to see it destroyed, and I just want to say 2 things. Number one, I believe it was Ronald Reagan who said some of the most feared words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And secondly, if now the undercurrent here seems to be that 75 years ago, the Corps of Engineers was wrong. They did the wrong thing. Why do we think they're right today? My experience with them has been they're all one way, one-headed. That's it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brandon Risley, Flagler Beach resident. In the beginning of this project, you guys stated that the project was to create better water quality and a better habitat for juvenile fish and wildlife. Now you've switched your stance and you're saying that it's all about getting back to the wetland elevation. So when you level everything and get back to the wetland elevation, what happens in 10 years from now when the sea level are rising, as you stated? And you said that the wetland elevation is critical within an inch or a half an inch, I heard you say. So what are we doing this project for? In 10 years from now, it's irrelevant. You've also showed on the maps that we have natural areas already being taken away from us. It's already naturally happening. So you're going to restore, so-called restore this area. You're going to demolish the area. You're not going to plant it back. You're going to hope Mother Nature does it for you, and you're going to walk away like you did a lot of the other projects. You're not going to come back and replant. You're not going to monitor it. I mean, come on, let's get real. You guys are going to walk away. You got this grant money. You're pushing this thing through as fast as you can. You almost had it through in Palatka until everybody stood up. But you need to really think about what you're doing here. You don't have the science to back it. And science, you start with a benchmark. Then years later, you test. You don't have that. You can't show us that. You know, I've been a state certified pest control operator in the state of Florida for the past 15 years and the owner of a pest control company. And I find it really confusing that you would not go after the point source of the problem, which is fertilizer runoff or nitrogen. This is coming for a for-profit company, okay? You're putting a Band-Aid on this problem. What good is this project if you don't go after the source of the problem first?
Need you to wrap
We'll have chlorophyll, I'm sorry?
Need you to wrap up.
We'll still have chlorophyll A in our water when you're gone because the real problem was not addressed. The district should be working with our Flagler County commissioners to enact a blackout period for fertilizer during the rainy season. This will address part of the problem. In addressing wastewater and stormwater runoff, maybe work on the restoration project if it's needed after you address the real problem. Thank you.
All right. You're our last speaker. You got it.
Hi, my name is Lori Otline. I
live in the project area, so it is very personal to me. My husband's a fishing guide, so it's very personal to him. But basically, even if it wasn't personal to us, even if it was like on the West Coast, why are you destroying a thriving, wonderful ecosystem? I don't understand. I mean, we're back there, we see it, it's wonderful, it lives, there's everything going on back there that's wonderful, and now you're going to destroy it. I've seen what you've done in New Smyrna, and it's never come back. 10 years later, it's still a disaster. So why are you going to fix what isn't broken? That's all I got. Thanks.
Well, y'all need to get an award. Y'all stuck it through all the way to the very end. So I applaud you. And I look around the room. I see folks I see a few folks I've known for more than a few decades. Always nice to see you. All I can say is I did my part. I got as many questions as I could answer in the period of time, and I'm glad that we gave everybody an opportunity to speak a little bit. At this point, this is scheduled for the board on the 11th of December. I believe that's right. And I would say about a week before, go online, SJRWMD, you can Google it, you'll get right there to it. And it will, you look at the agenda and there'll be all the backup material about that. And the board meeting is in Palatka. Obviously, some of you have been before, you can go back. And if you can't be there, you can see it streamed. I appreciate you being here and taking a part of this. And we appreciate our host tonight, this wonderful church. I think it served us well in terms of being able to give everybody a chance to speak in a very comfortable way. So, Mr. Chairman, are we adjourned or anything else need to be said? All right, with that, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.